Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Mike. I'm one of the founders of RethinkDB, both the company and the open source project. I'm curious, before I start, could you guys just raise your hands if you've heard of RethinkDB before? Yeah, okay. How many people actually use RethinkDB? Okay, so we got a couple people who know how RethinkDB works, but I'm going to try to dig into a few projects that we're working on at Rethink and talk a bit about what the direction of the project is. So as a brief summary, RethinkDB is an open source distributed database. It's one of the most popular projects on GitHub right now. It's probably the #1 document database in terms of stars. It's got north of 15,000 plus stars. Very active project. We build it with 200 plus people around the world. And what the database does that's really unique is it's really well suited to building real-time apps. I have to say that this talk comes at a very interesting time for the project. Some of you may have read on Hacker News or heard that the company, after 7 years of work, we have a dedicated team of 10 to 15 people in Mountain View, California. So after 7 years of work, the company is shutting down, unfortunately. The whole team is going to work for Stripe. But a lot of the core team members and our community have rallied to help continue the open source work with RethinkDB. We're currently in the process of helping RethinkDB get in the hands of a foundation to be able to work on advancing the state of art in database technology. So I want to talk not about RethinkDB so much, even though RethinkDB is really cool. I'm going to touch on it a little bit. I want to talk about a project that we have called Horizon. Who's heard of Horizon so far? All right. So Horizon is a really interesting project because the way that people use RethinkDB is that they build applications that have a backend, a front end, lots of complex moving pieces, but RethinkDB sits at the core. It's a very powerful database, very scalable, designed to solve problems with real-time apps. Our largest community, because we work across a lot of languages, our largest community is definitely JavaScript developers. So we have been asked by our community over the past 7 years to basically build Horizon. And what Horizon is it's a scalable, real-time, open source, complete backend that makes it really simple to build real-time apps. So I'm going to get started by just talking about Horizon. Horizon's goal is basically to make it really easy to build modern and real-time apps. At RethinkDB, we really care about democratizing access to complex technology and making it really easy to use. And when people started working with Rethink and they started working with JavaScript, they asked us to basically take the same developer experience and try to think about how to solve problems around building JavaScript apps. So let's talk about what a real-time app is first, because I keep mentioning the real-time web. So I'm sure that most people, most people are familiar with what a real-time app is if you use things like Google Docs or Slack. I'm going to talk a bit about more in a second. But before we dive into that, it's important to talk about what RethinkDB is, because that sits at the core of this entire stack. And RethinkDB is a NoSQL database, so it's a document store. You store JSON documents in it, similar to something like MongoDB. We picked JSON because, for better or for worse, it's the data format for the web. And it's a distributed database that's easy to scale. So as you add nodes to it, it just linearly scales out. When nodes go down, you can bring it back up. People run very large clusters of RethinkDB databases. Fidelity runs like 25 nodes for millions of users every day on their primary web and mobile apps. It's extremely scalable, extremely powerful. And the two things that we cared about for RethinkDB is making it really easy to operate and really easy to develop on. And so to talk about real-time apps, everyone remembers probably the first time you used Google Docs. Google Docs is like this moment where someone said, go check this thing out, and you go to a web page, and you see a blinking cursor, and you're like, oh, it's a text editor. But then you start to see people type, and you're like, this isn't just a text editor. There's something very strange happening here, which is that you're starting to interact with people. You're having this sense of a visceral connection. This kind of user experience is what's been driving a lot of the energy around things like React, like Angular. Making it easier to build these engaging user experiences is what's elevating the state of the art in both database technology and on the front end. Slack is another really good example. So raise your hand if you use Slack. Yeah, so Slack is used by everybody, and it's because it's not just that it's real time. Like, Slack is just chat, right? So people have done chat a million times. Why is Slack so interesting? Well, it doesn't matter where you are. You're on your phone, you're on your desktop, you're on your iPad. It just moves with you. You're still talking to your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, and you have all these real-time streams coming in. It makes you feel connected. It has this very powerful, visceral, emotional experience. But it's really hard to build this kind of technology. And so, RethinkDB is unique as a database because it does something that no other database does, which is it provides change feeds on database queries. And what this means is that typically in a database, if you want to stay updated on the value of something, you have to write a request and then wait for the response. And if you want to stay updated, you have to do that every few milliseconds. This is called polling. And polling is really not great when you want to scale your app to millions of users, because if everyone keeps polling, you're not going to be able to scale it very easily. So in RethinkDB, instead, you can write a query, and then open a stream. This is an example of a simple query. It's just taking the contents of the table of users, and it opens a stream, and whenever a new document comes in, it's going to send you a little push notification. It's going to say you have a new document that's entered the system. However, more complex queries, things like filtering your users, taking the average. An example is, tell me everyone aged between 22 and 30 who lives within 2 miles of this latitude and longitude and tweeted between the hours of 2 a.m. and 7 a.m. every second Thursday of the month. That's a pretty specific query. And if you want to use RethinkDB, you can just open a stream and say, only tell me when new documents come in that affect that query. And that's really powerful because it allows you to basically build these very specific queries and stay updated on their values in a scalable fashion. And these streams are very scalable. So you can run tens of thousands of them on a single node, and you can scale it out linearly from there. So as an example of how people use this, and it's so powerful because basically there's no more polling, you just push changes to the app, and each server is stateless. But examples of how people use these kinds of change feeds to solve problems is collaborative web and mobile apps like Slack and Google Docs. Multiplayer games are a huge area because you have player events that are affecting the state of reality. So you're able to follow what's happening within the player world and update everybody by using these reactive streams. You're able to run transactions in parallel, do analytics side by side. So if you want to be able to say, tell me when users care about it more than a certain threshold and then react, then using a stream allows you to interact differently with your data set. Marketplaces are huge for this because you have like ad exchanges or anything where there's lots of transaction and analytics happening in parallel. You can really play with the economy and start to think about reacting to thresholds, and it starts to change how you build your application. My favorite by far use case is connected devices, or IoT. We've been talking about the Internet of Things for like a very long time, but we're finally starting to see the fruition of all that work. However, we have an enormous number of devices. I think that there's a report that says by, I want to say 2018 or 2020, 95% of the traffic on the internet is going to be IoT. But it's not smart traffic, it's just dumb devices spitting out data that nobody really knows what it means. So most people just store that data in some database and eventually think, I'm going to use it in some way. But what's happening instead, when you have a stream that you can react to, especially across the meaning of that data, is that you have farmers in fields with like sensors that are deployed, and they're able to track things like humidity and moisture and say, if it hits a certain threshold, then alert me, and then I can take this action. And what's powerful about this is that you have a whole class of data where it's transient in value, it expires quickly, but if you act on it in the moment, you can derive great value. The most powerful use case for RethinkDB that I have, it's my favorite by far, and I talk about this often because it's so cool. So NASA uses RethinkDB to help astronauts stay safe in space. So basically, they have a huge Docker node RethinkDB cluster. And what they do is, when astronauts go into EVA, when they go out of the space station to take a spacewalk, there is a risk, and it's my new nightmare, there's a risk that the suit can malfunction, and that a hose can break, and you can start to fill with liquid. You can drown in space. Now, this is terrifying, but so they really care about astronaut safety, and so there are sensors on the suits that basically track all of these details. And this data is then sent to ground control, and in real time they process and analyze the data to be able to react to issues that come up to ensure astronaut safety. And this is the kind of thing that you need a new breed of technology to solve these kinds of problems. And that's what we've been doing with RethinkDB for the past 7 years, and we're going to continue doing it for the next decade. So Horizon brings RethinkDB's real-time magic to the browser. Oftentimes what happens when people start using Rethink and they're a JavaScript developer, we saw this happen so many times, people would take this change feed, which is a raw connection to the database, and then they'll take the JavaScript driver and try to import it in the browser. And they'll be like, it doesn't work. Like I don't know how this should work. And we'll tell them, well, don't do that. Don't open a raw database connection in your browser. That's not safe. But then when the 50th person asked us, we were like, there's something here. Like, there must be a reason that people keep wanting to try to do this. And when talking to all these developers, we realized that basically, we could build a tool that would allow people to rapidly build these kinds of real-time apps and help them in the JavaScript world as well as in the backend world. And Horizon is our approach towards this problem. It benefits from being something that we've built with the community over the past 8 months. It was started as a community project. More than 2,500 people were involved in its design and development, and we've been shipping releases pretty quickly. And we have a pretty big vision for how it's going to help solve problems around building apps fundamentally in JavaScript. Because our goal at RethinkDB is always democratize access to hard technology and make it really usable, friendly, and simple for people to get started. So let's take a look at how the magic works. So first, it's important to talk about what it takes to build a JavaScript app today. because it's actually pretty hard. If you tell somebody, hey, I want to go play with React, you got to do a lot of things to get started. You got to think about setting up your database. Which web server do I use? How do I just get data back and forth with some basic like CRUD backend code? Or maybe you want to be really hip and you want to try to use GraphQL, and you end up setting up all these different tools. You have to figure out how to do auth, like who has access to what data. How do I manage sessions, especially when I'm moving between mobile and web, and people are moving between networks, like cell networks. You have to have sticky sessions. And then finally, and this is the most onerous for web developers, is that you have to figure out how to actually deploy and scale this thing. And so what happens is that you start by saying, I want to build some cool, shiny app, and you get dragged down to the bottom of the stack. And that's not a pleasant experience for somebody who just wants to like build this tactile, really usable, simple app, and they find out that they're learning about how to set up like Kubernetes. So we wanted to try to make it simpler. So there are really 3 patterns for how people solve building JavaScript apps today, and it's worth talking about how they solve this problem. The first is that they build from scratch using popular stacks. So I'm sure people have used the mean stack, the sane stack, the lemp stack. There's the 3 stack, which is like RethinkDB, Redux, and Express. And this is the reason that the community does this is because there are all these open source components on GitHub. There's a million projects, and no one knows how to get started. So someone eventually says, hey, this seems like a pretty good set of tools. Go use this. And then a community can start to build around it. You can have some sort of standardization. And what's funny about it is that it reminds me a lot of the early days of Linux distributions. Because back in the 90s, when open source was first starting up and people were building all these open source components, some people just said, hey, I have my local Linux user group, my Linux lug, the Linux user groups, and I'm going to go make my own distribution of these open source components. And they named it things like Puppy Linux and Mandrake and all these ridiculous names. And eventually we had polished versions like Ubuntu and Red Hat that allowed enterprises to standardize on them to actually solve real problems. And that is a really powerful thing for a community of software developers because it allows you to actually move forward and move more quickly. When you have these stacks, it's hard to figure out like, okay, I want to add Redux now to this thing. Well, how do I do that? And now you have to sort of explore the idea, and there's not a consensus around it. So having a good environment to be able to learn and adapt new technologies is challenging when you're stuck in that model. The second pattern, and this is obvious why people love these tools, is a backend as a service. Things like Firebase or Parse. The promise is phenomenal. We'll take care of all the problems for you, and you just write your front-end app. And frankly, these tools are incredible. The issue with them, and this is more of a fundamental limitation, Firebase and Parse, all these tools, they're great for the problems that they solve. But if you have a complete API that abstracts away all those backend details, at some point, you're going to want to move past the bounds of what that API can do. And when you hit that wall, you find that you end up going back through the whole process that I described in the beginning anyway. And so the API ultimately limits what features you can build, which means that these tools are really good for a certain class of applications, but you're not going to build like your next startup running entirely on these kinds of backends unless you're just still in the early prototyping phase. We see a lot of people tend to move off of them when they hit like the 6 to 12 month, maybe 18-month point. And the third pattern, and this is where the world is going in my opinion, is to use as an open source backend. And this is basically a complete stack that you get on your laptop in a second, ready to go. And it gives you a complete environment that lets you build applications very simply. So a prominent example is Meteor. Meteor has done a great job of tying together everything in an age when we didn't have things like React. We didn't have, frankly, RethinkDB. And they're able to build this full real-time environment by basically tightly coupling all the components together. Meteor is really powerful, but it tends to put you into the Meteor world. So if you're a Meteor developer, you work with Meteor components. You can use JavaScript components, but it's not as tightly integrated into the greater JavaScript ecosystem. And Horizon falls into that same category. It gives you a complete environment that lets you get up and running and build your apps, but consolidates best practices and tools for development. So Horizon, to restate what it is, it extends RethinkDB's capabilities to the front end and gives you common components for solving patterns that you have to keep doing over and over and over in JavaScript. Our goal is to take 95% of the problems that you solve and just give you standard components that you can just use, and then they try to step away at every point when you're ready to advance beyond the bounds of what it's providing. You can start, the value is that you can start building React and Angular apps with no backend code whatsoever. You start from the browser, you start using this client API in the browser. When you're ready to extend to the backend, you can then use Node.js modules on the backend to extend your functionality. And because it's running on RethinkDB, it takes advantage of RethinkDB's two unique properties, which is linear scale and real-time push. And it's able to scale up to millions of users, and it's a completely open source stack. So you can think of it as like open source Firebase. It's running on your laptop, deploy it where you want, how you want, to the cloud, to your own machines, wherever you like. The stack is very simple. You have a client library that is a JavaScript library with an API based on RxJS observables. So you have these streams that you can consume. Everything is stream by default in Horizon. The backend is basically a Node.js server that mediates the database and front-end connection. And then it's running on RethinkDB, which is a real-time database that pushes streaming updates. It's framework agnostic. We don't really care what you use, make no opinions about it. The goal is not to define how you build applications, but to take away problems that are common to all JavaScript apps. So you can use it with React or Angular. The example I'm going to show you today uses actually Vue.js because it's a little bit simpler and shorter in terms of the lines of code to show. You have full stack real-time updates. Updates on the database happen at the client. Updates at the client end up in the database. So you're able to have full-time real-time push through the whole stack. And it's extensible, so you can use it in any environment you like. You can drop it into a node server like Express, Hoppy, or Koa and extend the abilities of what your backend is providing. Very simply, to get up and running, just get RethinkDB, get Node, and do npm install Horizon. To start a new project, you have this tool HZ. It's like Git for Horizon. You start a new project, and you serve it with HZServe. You have a folder to put all your static assets into, CSS, JavaScript, front-end tools. And you have a configuration file. The reason why we kept it very light is because you can use whatever build pack you want, whatever tooling you want to be able to do testing. It doesn't really matter. This is the only thing that Horizon expects. I'm going to briefly walk through what it's like to use the Horizon Client API. So basically, it uses collections. If you guys are familiar with RethinkDB tables, that's the analog in Horizon world. You can chain commands to collections to perform queries. And they return observables to be able to consume these streams from the backend. To connect to it, this is literally all you have to do to be able to start a Horizon connection and to be able to either create the table if it doesn't exist or access an existing collection. So just Horizon, and that's it. You want to store a document, just do store into JSON, very simple. Similarly, this is an example of a more complex query, which uses chaining to be able to build out a query. In this case, we have the messages collection. We're going to order it in descending time to receive the 10 most recent messages. We're going to limit it to the 10 most recent documents. We're going to fetch it from the backend. And on the client, we're now going to log the entire set that we fetched. You have a pretty rich, not as rich as RethinkDB, but a pretty rich query language where you can do things like sorting and ordering, all maintained, streaming, real time. And you can do aggregations across multiple streams and multiple document sets. So you can combine these streams in your client and be able to do lots of interesting patterns in the front end with modeling. Behind the scenes, it's converting everything into RethinkDB's query language, which is REQL. Indexes are automatically used. If you're in development mode, it's going to create everything for you automatically. So if you're a RethinkDB user who keeps having to create tables and indexes, our belief is always be explicit with your indexes, know what's going on. But for when you're rapidly building an app, you don't want that. You just want it to get out of your way and just rapidly create all the things for you on the fly. We also really rely on observables to do some of this magic. So observables are an incredibly rich library that is going to be in the ES7 spec, or I think it's in the spec. Hopefully, it'll be actually in ES7. It's developed by Microsoft. We really like it because we're all functional programming people, a bunch of Haskell and Lisp nerds. And so observables really speaks to us because it gives you lots of ways to slice and dice your data, and it simplifies doing lots of complex Now I'm going to serve it, HZServe, if you guys can see that. Second here. All right, so I'm going to do HZServe --dev. Now I'm going into development mode because I want to be able to have it automatically create tables and indexes for me. And you'll see that it says my application is now available at this port, and the interface for RethinkDB, because you can still get to the underlying database if you need to, is available here. And now it says Horizon is ready for connections. So I'm going to go back to my app, and I'm going to open up both of these. Give me a second here. Okay, so this is now my chat app, and I'm going to say, hey guys, this is real time. Now, I don't have unfortunately, the Wi-Fi is down, so we don't have little cute avatars here. But you can see how this is all happening on the client side. Now, this looks like every other real-time app that you've seen before. But I'm going to now log into the database administration side, and I'm going to show you what's actually happening. Okay, so this is the dashboard that you get on every instance of RethinkDB when you start using it. You can see that we designed it to be very friendly and accessible. At the same time, it's a really powerful technology. So as I write an update, you can see that we're going to have a little write that just came into our database for a second. And we can go into the tables, and we can see that there's a number of tables in this that Horizon's created for us. So chat is our messages. That's our collection that we looked at before. And you have these like other tables that are basically being used for internal metadata around authentication, around indexes, and things like that. If you go into the chat table, you can see that we have about 10 documents. If I had a cluster, I could like reshard and replicate my cluster with a couple of these button presses. You'll see it's telling me I don't have enough servers in my cluster to satisfy the requests that I'm offering. But normally you would just hit apply configuration and progress bars would go. But we're going to actually look instead at the Data Explorer. So the Data Explorer is this environment that lets you write JavaScript queries. Luckily, browsers now have ES6, so it's even prettier than it used to be. And if we look at the table, I'm going to bump this up so you guys can see it. Going into the Horizon chat database, and now we're going to look at the table. It's nice doing completion for me and being friendly. So this is the contents of our document. So see it has the HZ_V identifier, which allows you to basically see versions. If I wanted to see a real-time stream, I can just do .changes. And now you can see that if I say hello, I have this exact same change mode that just popped into my database. And now what I can do is I can say filter for each message where the message text is equal to ping.delete. What this is going to do is it's going to find the message that has the text ping, and it's going to delete it. And there we go. And that's full stack reactivity from the database all the way to the client. If I want to just finish up my session and delete all the documents, in the database I issue a delete, and in the client it immediately consumes it. This is really powerful because it allows you to create these massive real-time architectures where you have people just using a RethinkDB database, and you can have Horizon apps running on top that are consuming the streams that don't know anything about each other whatsoever. So today available, you can store and query data over WebSockets, live updates, serve static assets, do OAuth with a number of providers, including Auth0, and you have a rich access control mechanism that actually lets you do very granular, very specific programmatic control over your access control. And what we're planning, shipping in upcoming releases, one is server-side plugins are coming pretty soon, which is massively powerful because it's going to allow people to write custom modules for Horizon to extend the functionality of their Horizon server without needing to actually set up a whole node environment. We're going to add optimistic updates so you can consume updates optimistically in your UI. An admin UI just like RethinkDB has to be able to feel like it's a rich, engaging experience when you're working with it as a developer. And the most exciting thing, I think, is probably GraphQL and Falcor, that we're thinking about adding adapters to be able to query your data set, not just using our API, because we make no opinions about how to build software, but by using other APIs as well. So the bottom line is, Horizon makes it dead simple to quickly prototype your web and mobile app in your browser and then scale it on the back end and scale it to millions of users. If you want to get involved, because we are an open source software project, and now that the company has ended, the open source community is now just getting on its feet, and we're starting a massive distributed development project. And so if you want to participate, you can find us at discuss.horizon.io. If you're a RethinkDB fanatic and you want to help with the open source future of RethinkDB, and I would ask that you do if you care about it, because we're at the point where either it's going to be something that's going to continue to advance the state of art in database technology for the next 10 years, or it's going to become a project that is orphaned. And I don't think it has to be that, because we have such a passionate and powerful community. So if you want to get involved, you can join us on Slack. #OpenRethinkDB is the group where we're all organizing together right now. So if you want to get started, you can go to horizon.io, and I look forward to you guys finding me on Twitter. I'll be the bald guy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Questions?
Let's move to the questions. We have 36 questions. Let's see how many you can answer in 5 minutes. Go.
Yeah, I got this. I speak very quickly. Okay, so RethinkDB stickers. I actually don't have any right now, but I'll get some to you if you find me on Twitter. I do have little thinkers. When you're stressed about your database, come find me later, and I have a small handful. How is it different from Firebase? It's open source. It's not a web service. You can actually run the whole stack on your laptop. It also is much richer because Firebase has a simpler database, whereas RethinkDB is an extraordinarily powerful general-purpose database. And because the real-time streams are more than just getting and sending data, but you're able to do it on essentially any query that can be MapReduce, which is most queries. So as RethinkDB gets more powerful, Horizon gets more powerful as well. We're going to hopefully add real-time streams, change feeds to joins. And that's just the holy grail, because you can just have lots of bits of data and magically join them and consume real-time streams. So because it's open source, it gives it a lot of different ways it can move. When will RethinkDB support GraphQL? So we've been working on this for a while. The key fact that we wanted to do GraphQL through Horizon, not through RethinkDB proper, at least not for the time being, although there's a lot of open source projects that are already heading in that direction. But we were waiting for plugins to hit for Horizon, and now that we have a plugin architecture that's almost ready to go, we'll be able to very quickly add plugins to do things like use GraphQL. I think GraphQL is extraordinarily exciting. What are the advantages to using RethinkDB over MongoDB? So MongoDB is a JSON data store just like Rethink. It doesn't have real-time streams. It also, because RethinkDB is a massively parallelized engine that shards data across cores in the CPU, across solid state, it's extraordinarily powerful architecture that is different from every other database on the market. We're able to do things like distributed joins, which is not something you get in Mongo. So in Rethink, we encourage using lots of tables and joining them and being able to have fluency around your data model. The query language is also different because in Mongo, you send over a JSON object that represents a transformation you want to make to your data. SQL, you send over a string. In RethinkDB, the query language embeds in native code. So you're just writing JavaScript, Python, Ruby, and data flows from left to right. You build these really elegant chains. And if you're a functional programming nerd, you're going to be right at home. Let's see. So what do we have next? I think we already answered that. So why should choose Horizon over Firebase? I think we already talked a bit about that. Does it have a permission system to access data like Firebase? Yes, it actually has. We got a lot of feedback that the issue with security rules in Firebase is that you don't always know why it failed, you just know that it failed. And so we built a more programmatic control flow for access control. It's still something that's being worked on because there's a couple rough edges, but to us it's very important that you feel like you're programming and not just validating against some blind rules that you don't know when failures come. Why are the streams scalable? That's a really good question. RethinkDB is a very complicated product. It goes from assembly code all the way to JavaScript. There's a custom coroutine engine that's sitting at the core of the whole database that basically shards data across cores in the CPU and then manages all of these parallel processes. And it's extraordinarily scalable, which is why other databases, when we announce change feeds, Oracle now has a feature that's kind of like this. I think OrientDB also like live queries. But all of these databases, they tend to be doing like an incrementally rerunning the query. In RethinkDB, you hold on to the incremental MapReduce query that you have, and then you can run tens of thousands of these streams on a single node, upwards of 30 to 50,000. And then add nodes, people run 25 to 35 node clusters. So there's something happening that goes all the way down to assembly, and that's why it's far more scalable. Do we have more time?
Yes, a minute and a half.
Okay, well, I'm speaking really quickly. This is good. All right, so what is the future of RethinkDB? I've read articles about it shutting down. So yeah, so this is an unfortunate thing that happened. We were building the company for 7 years, a core dedicated team. We're really proud of what we built. And the company behind it is shutting down, but we've all gone to join Stripe because Stripe cares about developer tools and Stripe cares about open source. And a lot of the core team members still want to contribute and intend to keep moving forward with RethinkDB. And as soon as it happened, the reason why we posted that we're shutting down is because it was a call to action for our community to get together to start organizing. And I've honestly been overwhelmed by the amount of support we've seen for RethinkDB. It's been truly incredible because it feels like we've been working on something so hard for 7 years, and people really respect and care about that. So we have a really great open source community that's going to continue moving forward with it. We're right now forming advisory groups. Our intention is to get it in the hands of a foundation so we can have all of the structure we need to have a long-term future for RethinkDB and Horizon. Is that it? Do we have more time?
One last question.
One last question.
A short answer.
A short answer. OK. Given an easy deployment tool like now.sh, how would you host the RethinkDB instance? Now is really about the front end. It gives you this really great environment. I think it's an amazing piece of technology. RethinkDB is meant to be more flexible, so you use it a lot of different ways. If you want to run a deployment, I think tools like Kubernetes have raised the bar to be able to let people run their own instances. But you also can use something like Compose.io to be able to have a RethinkDB instance in the cloud really easily.
Thank you so much. Thank you.